How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Michael Thurwell of VEDA World News. You can catch this episode and more at VEDACom.com with 2 M's. Sir, your name.
My name is Vieira.
And ma'am, your name.
My name is Erin Bartels, and it's gluten-free milk BJJ on Instagram and TikTok.
Okay, and the reason why we are here today is because we have we don't want to use the term martial art because you told me last time this is not a martial art.
Yeah, it isn't.
For those that are watching, how would you define Krav Maga?
Krav Maga is a self-defense technique, so it's based on real-world applications and not closed competitions and simulations.
Understood. And you are a practitioner of what?
I do a little bit of everything. I do Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, done a little bit of MMA classes. I used to do Taekwondo.
Okay, sounds really good. Now, the reason why we're having this discussion here is because we have a little bit of a detractor. Can we say that? Is that true?
Personal opinion.
Okay, great. Now, what is your personal opinion on Krav Maga?
Well, I think one thing about Krav Maga that is the reason that I don't do it personally is that it lacks a lot of sparring. A lot of it is practice and presentation, and it's exists within very defined closed systems, if that makes any sense.
Understood. And sir, how would you in rebuttal respond to that?
Well, I think it's quite interesting to have that reaction because we do get that a lot from people who are used to the martial art techniques, which have been perfected, especially over the 20th century. So they are more designed for specific types of fight that seem to be open, where in reality it is the opposite. When you get to train Krav Maga, it depends on the school that you're training, of course, but we do have sparring, we do have several other engagement techniques, but those are reserved for advanced students. We don't want to take a newbie, someone who's a rookie who never stepped in a mat, and put him in a situation in which he's going to have to start exchanging strikes with someone without even knowing how to do it properly. So it would be a risk for him, and we would be, in a way, distracting him from a real-life situation. If he ever was confronted with a real-life situation, it would be a much harder environment and something that he wouldn't be prepared for. So we reserve the time and the right moment to train that individual to do sparring when he has sufficient fundamental techniques.
Understood. And what are your thoughts on that particular perspective?
I mean, it's understandable. I mean, even in jiu-jitsu schools, sometimes they'll wait till a student's been training 6-7 months before letting them roll. Also, Krav is a bit different than some other martial arts because a lot of the techniques that they have are a little bit more brutal than a lot of they're self-defense. They're brutal, and it's you have to be careful when you're practicing those. I understand. I mean, obviously, I don't do Krav, so I don't necessarily know, but I also think that, for me at least, it's very difficult to practice a technique in a drilling context with an opponent who isn't necessarily resisting and they're following along with the drill, and be able to get that outside of a drilling context. I know I can get a technique down in a drilling context first day it's taught, but it'll take me months before I get it into in a real role or a real sparring session.
Understood. So in the sparring, it seems like you guys have something in common, more so than you have different. You have time into which you will let a student actually engage in certain kind of combat maneuvers or self-defense maneuvers, and so do you. You also have that same belief that it takes a little bit of time for a student, to go ahead and go in that direction, sir.
Yeah, in reality, I would say that the self-defense part, Krav Maga is usually divided in two. The self-defense modules, which are indeed more brutal, as you mentioned, because they have to enable, let's say, a 15-year-old girl who has a frail body to defend against a man who's twice her size, very heavier than her, and who is more aggressive. How do we train that individual to be able to stand a chance and strike that person and be successful to escape the situation? And then in the other scenario, You have people who actually train for years and become professional fighters, which is what usually happens to anyone who stays in the sport or in the self-defense technique. Now, the thing is, if you talk about specifically training for self-defense, it has to be quicker, it has to be more brutal, as you mentioned. But if you have to train body-to-body combat, which is the second part of Krav Maga, then it is very similar to other competition techniques, but the difference is we have no rules. So we will strike in points that are forbidden in certain martial art techniques. We will use whatever is available to us to be able to undermine the opponent, because what we are ultimately protecting is our physical integrity and our life.
Your thoughts, ma'am?
Well, first of all, a lot of jiu-jitsu schools will let you spar first day. That's just like some schools don't. And also, like, I wasn't necessarily criticizing the brutality of the techniques. I understand that, like, and like self-defense is an entirely different like thing than other martial arts. And that's understandable. That's fair. Yeah, I mean, I think like a big thing about Krav is like that I've seen is that there's a big issue with quality control, and that influences a lot of people's perspective on it. That like
Could you elaborate on quality control?
And I'm not referring to Victor in this case, but a lot of Krav instructors won't necessarily be super well trained, or at least the things they are training on are very, like, they have a wide variety, and like some of it is high quality, some of it's not high quality, and that's kind of, I think that's part of why like Krav gets a little bit of a bad rap.
Do you feel it gets a bad rap, Krav Maga?
Well, as I mentioned before, and we had spoken earlier when we talked about the history of Krav Maga and all of that is involved, I can only speak for my federation. And I do understand, because as there are several martial art techniques and several self-defense schools, you also have different federations and entities that represent those techniques. So it is very natural that once a system is open to the public, and this happened in the 70s with Krav Maga, it's quite new compared to other techniques, that many different teachers went in different directions. And some of them weren't even from Krav Maga, but they indulged in this Krav Maga spree, and it became very famous. So I do understand that there are several instructors, teachers, they will, for you to have an idea, they will travel to Israel and they will do a 1-week course, and they will claim that they are Krav Maga masters. Now, really? For you to have an idea, our yellow belts cannot get their belt without a strict exam and at least 6 months of training. At least. There are students that stay over a year. For you to get a black belt, it is impossible in our federation for you to do that with less than 10 years of training. It is unheard of. It's impossible. Okay. We only have approximately 6 masters in the world in our federation. So it's very strict, very closed. And quality control, I completely agree with Ms. Erin, is very important. If you don't work on that, it is something that you lose credibility on the technique, which is unfair because of that specific school or lack of experience and seniority of that school.
Understood. And it seems like that is another point that you two actually agree on. My question is, how come you guys didn't speak sooner?
Yeah, I don't know. I work at the front desk. I also just like kind of side point want to ask you, like, what do you think about the differences between Muay Thai and Krav? Because they're both martial arts developed for military. Like Muay Thai is developed out of Thailand as military defense, and Krav is Israeli defense by the IDF.
Are you asking me that question? Because I have absolutely no idea.
I'm saying it.
Okay. Sir?
Okay. In particular, between Muay Thai and Krav Maga, just like Muay Thai, just like Taekwondo, just like karate, you have these martial art techniques that are very specific with certain skills and certain environments. Now, Muay Thai is very concerned with striking, okay? And they also have close range striking using the elbows, using the knees. It is very sparring oriented. So indeed, it is something that focuses in that field. Krav Maga is not, even though because sometimes we have experience and we have information that comes from the media, different sources, and very often we're not quite informed about that subject. We end up putting the pieces together and reaching a conclusion. But in the end, Krav Maga is a technique that focuses on all different locations and spectrums, because it is our obligation to prepare that student to survive any real life situation. So we will train against any floor techniques. Talk about Jiu-Jitsu. We'll talk about close range techniques. You can talk about Muay Thai. You can talk about boxing that have the upper limbs. You can talk about karate that has a lot of power in the striking, but does not have the speed that is necessary for a real life application. So all of these, they are very detail oriented in one dimension. Whereas Krav Maga, we need to not only learn our entire system, but understand what other systems are about so that we can counter them effectively. Being able to take somebody who's completely unexperienced and actually do something rather than train only in our system and be used to that system alone. It is not very practical to do that, and that's not our philosophy. I hope I have made myself clear.
Yeah, no, I totally understand what you're saying. I think I agree to an extent that, like, you will see, like, people who cross-train between martial arts are usually, you know, more proficient at those individual martial arts. But I also do believe that, like, it's really important to drill the basics. I don't really know what you guys do that much. I don't pay that much attention. I'm on my computer doing homework.
Well, I want to invite you to be a part of my class one day so that you can actually learn more about it, because it's very important for us to get sufficient information to then form an opinion, because it is very common for this entity or that other entity or the media to talk about many different subjects, but in a superficial way. And once you dive in, you can actually make a decision for yourself, and I think that's the best way for you to actually form an opinion.
We're going to cut here, and the reason for that is because he's getting ready to actually instruct the course. So we'll be doing some back-end work here behind the scenes, giving some insight into what Krav Maga and what Vieira is all about right here in Houston, Texas. I want to say thank you very much for being on this particular segment here. Please, can you let everybody know who you are, where they can find you, and everything else?
I'm Erin Bartels. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at glutenfree milk BJJ. Yeah.
All right, well, you heard it here first. My name is Michael Thurber, photojournalist and sociologist here at VEDA World News. See you later.